The wind that morning carried the scent of smoke and soil, the kind of smell that clings to a soldier's uniform and never truly washes away. The year was 1944, and the Allied advance across Europe had turned every forest, hill, and farmhouse into a battlefield. To the west of the Vosges Mountains, a battered unit of the 36th Infantry Division trudged through knee-deep mud, their boots squelched with every step, rifles slung across tired shoulders, eyes scanning the mist for shapes that weren't trees. Among them walked Private William Carter, a quiet farm boy from Indiana who'd never expected to see Europe, much less die in it. Will, as everyone called him, was 24. He had clear blue eyes and a face too gentle for war. Back home, he'd fixed tractors, baled hay, and helped his mother at the family's feed store. When the war began, he'd enlisted with his cousin, Henry, who was killed during the landings in Italy. Since then, Will had carried a locket with Henry's picture, a small reminder of why he was still fighting. Now, trudging through rain and fog, Will marched beside Sergeant Frank Davis, a man who'd been in the Army long enough to forget what quiet sounded like. Davis's jaw was set in a permanent frown, but he looked after his men like a bulldog guarding its pups. "Keep your eyes open," Davis muttered, glancing into the trees. "This fog's thick enough to hide a damn panzer." Will gave a faint nod. "You think they're still here?" Davis spat into the mud. "Son, until you see a German dead or running, assume he's waiting for you." The line of soldiers moved through a clearing, past the ruins of what had once been a French farmhouse. Smoke still rose from the blackened beams. Somewhere nearby, a church bell rang faintly, one of the few sounds left untouched by war. Their orders were simple: secure the nearby village of Saint Marcel, a small cluster of homes believed to be lightly held by retreating German troops. The men had been told it was routine cleanup. Routine. That word had lost all meaning months ago. By mid-morning, the rain had turned to mist. Lieutenant Andrews, their commanding officer, signaled for a halt. He was barely older than Will, with a clean face that didn't yet carry the look of a man who's seen too much. "All right, boys," Andrews said, unfolding a soggy map. "According to intel, the Krauts fell back 2 days ago. We move in slow, check the buildings, set up radio contact once we've cleared the village. Should be quiet," Sergeant Davis grumbled. "Quiet, my ass." Will smiled slightly but said nothing. He tightened his grip on his rifle and followed as they crept through the trees toward the open field that led to Saint Marcel. The fog hung low, swirling around the men's legs as they spread out into a staggered formation. The sound of boots against mud echoed faintly in the silence. Then, from somewhere far off, came a single gunshot. Sharp, echoing, final. Every man froze. Andrews raised a hand. "Hold!" The forest went still again. No wind, no birds, nothing. "Could have been a scout," whispered Will. Davis shook his head slowly. "Or a warning." They advanced slowly, crossing the field one cautious step at a time. Ahead lay the village, half collapsed. Walls blackened by shell fire. Windows shattered. A once white chapel leaned sideways, its bell tower split by artillery. As they reached the first house, the silence felt heavier than the rain. Will's heart pounded in his chest. He peered through a broken doorway. Nothing but overturned furniture and a family photograph lying in the dirt. A mother, father, 2 children. He turned the photo over and found a date, 1938. 2 years before everything went to hell. Lieutenant Andrews gave a signal. The platoon began moving through the narrow main street, sweeping corners and clearing rooms. For 10 minutes, there was nothing. No gunfire, no movement. Just the sound of boots and nervous breathing. Then it happened. A sudden metallic click. A grenade clattered from a window above and rolled across the cobblestones. "Down!" someone shouted. The explosion tore through the street, throwing dirt and debris into the air. Before anyone could recover, machine gun fire erupted from the rooftops. "They're in the buildings!" Davis yelled, dragging a wounded man into cover. Bullets slammed into the walls, shattering bricks. Mortars whistled overhead, exploding in the distance. Will threw himself behind a stone wall, his ears ringing. He caught a glimpse of dark helmets moving between ruins. Dozens of them! "Ambush!" he shouted. "They were waiting for us." Lieutenant Andrews tried to radio for support, but the static drowned his words. "Command's not responding. They've jammed us. The men were trapped. Get to the farmhouse," Davis roared, pointing toward a sturdier-looking structure at the end of the street. "Move!" The soldiers sprinted through smoke and rubble, dragging the wounded behind them. Shells exploded around them, raining shrapnel. One man went down, then another. Will reached the farmhouse and kicked open the door. Inside it was dark, the air thick with dust and cordite. The platoon piled in, panting, coughing, bleeding. Davis slammed the door shut, overturning a table to use as cover. "How many are left?" 12, Will answered after a quick glance. "Maybe 13 if Andrews makes it." The lieutenant stumbled in moments later, clutching a bleeding arm. His eyes were wide with disbelief. "They knew we were coming. They set a damn trap." The farmhouse shook as another shell landed nearby. "What now, sir?" Will asked. Andrews looked around, then sank to the floor. "We hold this position until support arrives." But deep down, everyone knew no help was coming. Outside, the sound of German voices echoed through the rain. They were closing in. The men fought through the night, hour after hour of deafening gunfire and exploding walls. By dawn, the farmhouse was barely standing. 6 men were wounded, 2 dead. The radio was destroyed, the ammunition nearly gone. Will sat against a wall, his hands shaking from exhaustion. The air smelled of gunpowder and blood. Davis crouched beside him. "We can't stay here. They'll surround us by noon. Where do we go?" "Anywhere but here." But there was nowhere to go. Then Will noticed something. A faint light flickering through the fog outside, far beyond the village. A ridge, higher ground. If he could reach it, maybe he could signal the artillery units. He turned to Davis. "I can make it." "Make what?" "The ridge. If I get up there, I might get a signal out." Davis stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "You step outside that door, you're a dead man." Will looked around at the wounded, the frightened, the barely conscious. "We're all dead men if I don't," the sergeant sighed, jaw tight. Then he handed Will his compass. "If you're going, make it count." Will nodded, slung his rifle and stepped into the fog. The fog outside swallowed him whole. The air was thick with smoke, ash, and the metallic scent of spent shells. The ground beneath Will's boots squelched as he stepped cautiously through puddles of blood and rain. He didn't dare turn back. Behind him, the faint flashes of gunfire still flickered through the mist. His unit, pinned down, fighting to stay alive. Every breath sounded too loud. Every crack of a twig made his heart jump. He crouched low, his rifle tight against his chest, eyes scanning the ruined village for movement. The world had gone eerily silent again. A door creaked somewhere nearby. Will froze, pressing himself against a broken wall. A German soldier stepped out, tall, armed, his face hidden beneath a helmet and shadow. He lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his tired expression. Will could have shot him, but a gunshot would bring the others. He waited, counting heartbeats, until the man turned away. Then Will moved, silent as breath, sliding through a narrow alleyway and into the fields beyond the village. The mud pulled at his boots, the cold biting through his uniform. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, though it might have been artillery. His goal was the ridge, a small rise about a mile to the north. From there, he might get a signal through the static and chaos. The ridge would mean life for his men. Failure would mean death for all of them. Halfway there, He dropped to his stomach as a German patrol passed along the dirt road. 6 men with rifles slung, speaking quietly in low voices. Their boots splashed through puddles as they disappeared toward the village. Will waited until the sound faded, then crawled forward again, inch by inch through grass slick with dew and blood. He moved like a ghost, his uniform blending with the mud. He thought of home, of his mother's face when she waved him off at the train station, her hand trembling but proud. He had promised her he'd come back. Now that promise felt like a prayer whispered into a storm. When he reached the base of the ridge, the first light of dawn was bleeding through the clouds. The air shimmered with smoke from burning fields. Far below, he could still hear faint gunfire. His platoon, barely holding on. He climbed carefully, hands gripping wet rocks, every movement slow and deliberate. His muscles ached, his shoulder throbbed from where shrapnel had grazed him earlier. But he didn't stop. Finally, he reached the top, a jagged rise overlooking the valley. From here, the view stretched for miles. To the south, he could see the smoldering remains of Saint-Marcel. To the north, faint flashes from Allied artillery, miles away. He took out the battered field radio slung at his side, the one Andrews had abandoned after it stopped working. Will had salvaged it, rewired it with scraps of wire and a metal pin. It was barely functional. He set it down, adjusting the knobs with numb fingers. Static crackled. "This is Private William Carter," he said, voice trembling. 36th Infantry Division, St. Marcel Sector. "We're surrounded!" Requesting immediate artillery strike on grid. He glanced at his compass, reading the coordinates from the map crumpled in his pocket. "Grid 2149, enemy company advancing from the east. We are pinned." Repeat, pinned. Static, then, faintly, a voice. "This is command." "Repeat your coordinates, soldier." Will's eyes widened. "Grid 2149. They've got us trapped in Saint-Marcel. We can't hold much longer." The reply came through clearer this time. "Coordinates confirmed. Artillery inbound. ETA 20 minutes. Hold your position." He exhaled, relief washing over him like warm sunlight. For the first time in hours, he allowed himself to sit down. His hands were shaking uncontrollably, but his relief didn't last long. Down below, the German patrol had stopped. One of them was pointing up the ridge, toward him. Will saw the glint of binoculars, then the flash of a rifle muzzle. A bullet whined past his head, striking the rock beside him. He ducked instinctively. Another shot followed, then another. "They saw me," he muttered. He grabbed the radio, slinging it over his shoulder, and began crawling toward the far side of the ridge. But the Germans were fast, already spreading out, climbing toward him. He fired a burst from his rifle, hitting one silhouette before diving behind a boulder. The return fire was immediate, deafening cracks echoing through the valley. He reloaded, ducked, and fired again. The recoil bruised his shoulder, but he didn't care. He wasn't fighting to survive. He was fighting to buy 20 minutes. The sky rumbled with distant thunder. Or maybe it was the sound of Allied guns preparing to fire. Will huddled behind the rock, counting every second, every breath. His ammunition was running low. 3 clips left, maybe 4. The Germans were shouting to each other, fanning out across the slope. One tried to flank him. Will caught the movement, spun, and fired. The man dropped instantly. But for every one he hit, 2 more came. He could feel the earth shaking beneath him now. The shells were close, just minutes away. He reached for the radio again. "Command, this is Carter. I'm under fire. Make it quick." "Hold steady, Private," came the reply. "Fire mission incoming. You're right on the edge of the strike zone. Get clear if you can." Will looked around. There was nowhere to go. The ridge was bare, open, surrounded by enemy fire. He was trapped. He laughed softly, shaking his head. Figures. Then he looked toward the village. He could just barely make out movement. The tiny, desperate shapes of his men still fighting in the ruins. That was enough. He stayed where he was, one hand on the radio, the other gripping his rifle. "Come on," he whispered to the sky. "Let it rain." Hell falls from the sky. The first shells hit at 800 hours. The sound was like the sky splitting open, a thunderous roar that shook the earth. Flames erupted across the valley as explosions tore through the German lines. Trees shattered like matchsticks, dirt and debris flying hundreds of feet into the air. Will covered his head as the shock waves rolled over him. The noise was unbearable, like the world itself was ending. Below, he could hear the Germans screaming, running, breaking formation. And then, silence. Just the soft hiss of smoke rising from the ground. He blinked, ears ringing. The ridge around him was scorched and blackened, but somehow he was still alive. His uniform was torn, his hands bleeding, but he was breathing. He crawled to the edge and looked down. The German positions were gone, obliterated. And there, emerging from the wreckage, were his men. They were alive, bruised, burned, bloodied, but alive. Sergeant Davis was at the front, waving his arm, signaling them to move. Will watched as they slipped through the chaos toward the tree line, dragging the wounded with them. He wanted to shout, to wave, to tell them he'd made it, but his voice caught in his throat. Then, movement. From behind, a German officer stumbled through the smoke, pistol drawn. He saw Will, raised his weapon. A single gunshot cracked through the air. The German fell. Will stared, his own rifle smoking. His breath came ragged, his vision swimming. He slumped against the rock, smiling weakly. "They're safe," he whispered. He reached for the radio one last time. "This is Private Carter. Mission complete." Then his hand went still. "That will carry the emotional resolution and legacy of the hero." The next morning, the world was silent again. The rain had stopped, leaving the ground slick and steaming. Smoke drifted lazily through the valley like ghosts that refused to leave. The men of the 36th Infantry Division moved slowly through the ruins of San Marcel. Their faces were pale, their eyes hollow. The village that had nearly been their grave now stood in eerie stillness. Sergeant Frank Davis limped across the mud, shouting for names. "Andrews! Collins! Reed!" His voice cracking with exhaustion. Each time, a few men answered. Each time, the list grew shorter. By noon, he had accounted for 32 survivors. 32 out of nearly 80. He stood among them, a cigarette trembling in his hand. They were alive, but only because someone had stayed behind. "Carter," Davis muttered under his breath. "That damn fool kid!" He turned toward the ridge. It rose above the valley like a scar, blackened, smoking, silent. He knew what it meant. No one could have survived that bombardment. Still, he gathered 4 men and began the climb. The slope was slippery, the mud thick, the air heavy with the stench of gunpowder. They found twisted trees, shattered helmets, and craters deep enough to swallow a jeep. Then, near a burned-out rock, they found the radio. Dented, blackened, but intact. The antenna was snapped clean off. Beside it, half buried in the dirt, lay a single dog tag. William Carter, 36th Infantry Division, 3912485 Davis, knelt in silence. His gloved hand brushed the metal clean. The tag was still warm from the sun. He looked around. No body, no weapon, no trace of where Carter might have gone. Only the faint outline of boot prints leading toward the forest. "Sergeant," one of the men whispered. "You think he made it?" Davis stared at the horizon for a long time. Then he said quietly, "He made sure we did." He pocketed the tag and started down the hill. 2 days later, the survivors were pulled back to Allied lines. Lieutenant Andrews was evacuated with shrapnel wounds. Davis filed the report himself, carefully, precisely, and without embellishment. He described the ambush, the encirclement, and the mysterious radio signal that saved them all. When it came to Private Carter, he hesitated. How could he explain it? How could he tell them that a single farm boy had crawled through hell, called down fire from heaven, and vanished? He wrote simply, Private William Carter, MIA during action, presumed killed in battle. The report was filed. The war moved on. Within months, new battles replaced the old ones. The world turned. But Davis never forgot. Every night, when he closed his eyes, he saw the ridge, the flash of artillery lighting the sky, the faint silhouette of a man standing against the fire, holding a radio in one hand and a rifle in the other. He'd seen courage before, but never like that. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, the survivors scattered across the world. Some went home to farms, others to factories or offices. Some tried to forget. But Davis couldn't. He returned to Indiana once the war was over, found Carter's family in a small farmhouse surrounded by wheat fields. Carter's mother was an older woman with silver hair and soft eyes that had seen too much grief. She met Davis on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "You served with my son?" she asked quietly. "Yes, ma'am," he said, removing his cap. "We fought together in France." Her voice trembled. "They said he was missing." Davis nodded slowly. "He was. We never found him." "But, ma'am," his voice caught, "your son saved 32 men. He gave everything so we could come home." She covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking. After a long silence, she said, "He always said he'd look after people, even when he was a boy." She led Davis inside. The walls were lined with photographs, family portraits, faded letters, a medal from Carter's father, who'd served in the Great War. On the table sat an unopened letter, the one Will had sent 2 weeks before his last mission. His mother had never been able to read it. Davis offered to read it aloud. The paper crackled as he unfolded it. The words were simple, unpolished, written in a hand that was both strong and uncertain. "Dear Ma, we're moving again tomorrow. I can't tell you where, but I think it's going to be tough. Don't worry about me. The guys here are good men. They look out for each other. That's what keeps us going. Tell Sarah I still have that photo she sent me, the one with her in the cornfield. When things get loud out here, I look at it and pretend I can hear the wind instead of the shells. I don't know when I'll be home, but I promise you this. I'll do my best to bring everyone back, even if it costs me. Love, Will." By the time Davis finished, both of them were crying. He handed her the dog tag. She held it tightly, as if afraid it might vanish too. "Thank you," she whispered. "No, ma'am," Davis said. "Thank him." Time passed. The war became memory, then history. Men aged. Medals gathered dust. Stories faded into whispers. In 1965, a memorial was built in the center of Saint-Marcel, a small plaque dedicated to the 36th Infantry Division. Visitors came and went. Few noticed the faint etching beneath the official names, scratched there by a survivor years later, for the one who called the fire and never came back. It wasn't until 1918, 45 years after the Roe battle, that the truth finally surfaced. A group of French hikers, exploring the Vosges forest, stumbled upon the rusted remains of a field radio tangled in roots. Nearby, they found a skeleton half buried in the soil, still wearing fragments of an American uniform. Pinned to the jacket was a corroded dog tag. William Carter, 36th Infantry Division. News of the discovery spread quickly. Within weeks, the U.S. Embassy confirmed the identity. When Sergeant Davis, now retired and living in Ohio, received the call, he wept for the first time in years. He boarded a plane to France and stood once again on the same ridge where it had all happened. The trees had grown back. The scars of war had softened, but the earth still remembered. The French officials handed him the recovered tag, cleaned and polished. Davis stared at it for a long moment before whispering, "You did it, kid. You really did." A year later, in 1990, Private William Carter was posthumously awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for extraordinary heroism. His family received the medal in a quiet ceremony, attended by only a few surviving veterans. There were no speeches, no parades, no reporters, just a small wooden box, an old mother, and a folded flag. When the ceremony ended, Davis approached her. She looked up at him with tired but peaceful eyes. "After all these years," she said softly, "I just wanted to know he wasn't alone." Davis smiled faintly. "Ma'am, he never was. We were all with him, then and now. Today, few remember William Carter. His name appears in no textbooks, no documentaries, no grand lists of war heroes, but his story lives on in the lives he saved, in the children and grandchildren of those 32 men who went home because of him." In a small Indiana town, his grave stands beside a field of corn. The headstone reads simply, "He kept his promise." Every year, on the anniversary of the battle, a wreath appears at his grave. No one knows who leaves it. Some say it's Davis's son. Others say it's a local historian. But the truth doesn't matter, because heroes like William Carter don't live for recognition. They live in the quiet moments, in the lives they saved, in the silence after the guns stop. And somewhere, under the soft wind of a peaceful field, the forgotten hero rests. Not forgotten at all. In war, not every hero wears medals or makes the history books. Some die alone, unseen, remembered only by the men whose lives they saved. Private William Carter was one of them. A man who walked into hell, not for glory, but for his brothers, and though history forgot his name, the world he helped protect never will.